How far, my people? Welcome back to No Gree Entertainment. I'm
So,
Drew.
I'm Ant.
Man, hey, we got a lot to discuss as always,
Yep.
bro. A
Yep, as
lot to
always, bro.
discuss.
Yep.
Did you eat? You ate before you came here?
I had like 4 or 5 spoons of that one childish snack
Oh, what?
you were talking
Jollof.
about. Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm
Why would you eat something like that?
I don't know, bro. I was in a hurry, so I was like, let me just eat this.
You
And
feeling childish?
yeah, I feel pretty childish.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually was listening to, Coco Melon
Mm,
soundtrack on the way here.
mm.
So definitely never again. Had me on my body for sure.
Yeah, that tracks. That tracks. To be honest,
hmm
I was feeling childish this afternoon as well. I'm gonna be honest. Before I came here, I was in the living room eating jollof rice, the childish snack. I was eating jollof rice, and I was scrolling TikTok while I was eating. And I came across a video of Tinubu, President Tinubu, saying, "We may be hungry, but we can manage our hunger." And honestly, I looked down at my jollof rice. I looked back at the video. And I looked back down at the jollof rice, and it was like a visceral feeling that I felt. It was like a spiritual awakening.
Mm.
The question just came into my mind, not as a political stance, but just as a sincere, practical question about, President Tinubu's relationship with jollof rice. So I guess my question to you is, do you believe that President Tinubu eats jollof rice? And if so, how much in one sitting?
He's definitely lying to us straight in our face. I feel
Mm,
like in one sitting he could take down a smooth six to seven plates right there. But I feel like each plate has its own, symbolism. You know
mm,
what I mean? I feel like that first plate, it doesn't really count. You know what I'm saying? It's just him judging the food. It's him like seeing if the cook's trying to play with him, and really just decipher, is this Ghanaian jollof rice or is this proper Nigerian jollof?
mm,
Plate two, we move on to plate two. That's the real meal right there. You know what I'm
okay.
saying? That's the meal where it's like, the second this jollof rice touches my mouth, the country can wait. You know what I'm saying? I don't have to, answer to y'all no more. Like,
Mm,
I'm really finna get down and dirty with this jollof. You know what I'm saying? Like the third plate of jollof, that's diplomatic. You know what I'm saying? Refusing that is, treason to the whole country. And I feel like he gets that third plate presented to him. He feels like, I have to eat. You know what I'm saying? Like, I can't
mm.
deny this.
Okay. I got a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you believe that President Tinubu blows on his jollof rice when he eats it? Or do you think he just and lets it, like, does he chew it? Like, what do you think?
I,
Do you think he blows on this? What I'm asking. Sorry for all the palaver.
um, I don't think he blows on it. I think he goes straight in. He sees the steam. The steam to him is just extra seasoning. He just dives straight in, and I feel like he doesn't even pay that steam or heat any mind. It's really just part of the flavor to him. So
Mm, that's profound, honestly.
yeah,
Definitely, I'm gonna take notes from him because normally, I inappropriately. So
yeah,
I definitely take notes from President Tinubu.
yeah. Like assert your dominance. Eat that
Hmm.
straight up. Who cares if the roof of your mouth gets burnt? Just go in. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not gonna lie, bro. I remember this one time. I was like in elementary school some years back
Hmm.
in the day. And, my mom, she asked me, like, son, what do you want to be when you grow up? You know what I mean? And I'm like 8, 9 years old. I don't really know what I want to be for real. But, I remember watching this one show and it had a bunch of police officers in it. So and they look cool to me. So I'm like, I don't want to be a police officer, mom. And, this woman, she didn't even waste any time. The second the last letter, the last syllable of officer came out of my mouth, she immediately was like, I reject that in Jesus' name. And I'm confused. I'm like, we're talking about career choices and whatnot. And, you're moving like Prime to Kembe Mutombo, sending my future away, with one block. So my question to you is like, why do African mothers love that phrase? I reject that in Jesus' name. The second you say something they don't like.
Oh, it's simple answer. Because it's outside of the holy trilogy of doctor, lawyer, and engineer.
Mm,
They deploy that as a spiritual attack. So when she says, "I reject that in Jesus' name," just know that the angels in heaven have sealed your fate. They have wrote your decree.
mm,
They rejected it for you.
yeah.
And it's like, you're Andre Iguodala, on a fast break, laying it up, and prime LeBron, blocks it off the backboard. They really be moving like that.
Mm.
I hope did she hit the no emote too with the finger?
She did, of
No,
course.
no.
Yeah.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
infamous finger wag.
Mm.
RP Dikembe.
RIP. Yeah. But yeah, that's definitely, it's a spiritual attack for sure. Spiritual defense.
Yeah. You know, she was moving like prime Kawhi Leonard out there. You
Mm,
know, I feel like the second she said, I reject that in Jesus' name, you know, the angels got straight to work. You know, they started rewriting my destiny and made sure that, you know, a police officer was not in my future. So, you know, definitely a good way to put it.
definitely. I got a little story time. Last Sunday I was in church and I started daydreaming a little bit. You know, the pastor was talking about the Last Supper, and for some reason, when imagining the Last Supper, my mind shifted the scenery to Lagos, Nigeria,
Mm.
and I saw a scene of the disciples all gathered around, but the headlights were on for a long time, and all of a sudden the overhead lights just completely went out, and it brought me to the question, if NEPA took light during the Last Supper, do you think that the disciples would have continued their conversation, continued the meeting, or do you think that they would have postponed it, like, and called it and just went home?
Mm. Definitely a very powerful, well thought question. I feel like, honestly, you know, God remains the same today, tomorrow, yesterday, all the
Amen.
time.
Amen.
So I feel like it would have continued, just probably not the same way, you know, as we know. I feel like, the enemy would have tried to work harder because, you know, the enemy tries to, you know, work as hard as it can in darkness. So,
Hmm.
you know, someone like Judas, you know, he definitely probably knew what the torch was.
I think he
But,
probably hired NEPA. He would have hired. Yeah.
oh, that's a great way to think
Yeah.
about it. You know, he was probably with NEPA.
Mm.
But, you know, just to, you know, stay connected to the whole story, I feel like Judas probably knew where, you know, they could get some light, but, you know, didn't want to say nothing or acted like he didn't know.
Do you think he had it like a candle hidden somewhere?
He probably did. It's
Mm.
probably in his pocket, right pocket. So
Mm.
I
And
feel
what if
like,
Thomas? Sorry, what if Thomas? Do you think Thomas would have thought the candle would have not worked? Because big doubter.
yeah, he probably would have doubted. You know, I probably wouldn't have thought to ask Judas. You know what I'm
Mm.
saying? So I feel like, you know, that's two, you know, people that it's really just like, you know. But all in all, I feel like NEPA, knowing them, they'd probably release a maintenance statement the next morning,
Yeah.
you know, with no follow ups. Probably just, you know, continue darkness, you know what I'm saying? The venue they had the Last Supper in is probably still dark, you know, to this very day. So
Mm.
definitely can't be trusted in any, you know, circumstance.
Yeah. To be honest, I imagine the same result. Everything that you said, it lines up pretty much, and that's. I think NEPA. I don't know if they would have released a statement. To be honest, I think they would have probably
Just left them in the dark.
let them in the dark. Yeah.
No pun intended.
No pun intended. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, this show called Love Island, they just dropped season 8 or whatever, and it's a pretty popular show. You know, I saw my sister, you know, she was watching it. And I decided, you know, it looks kind of interesting. You know, it's not really my thing, but I decided to sit down and watch with her. And, you know, if you've never seen Love Island, at the start, you know, they do a thing where like they introduce the new contestants and all that crap. And, characters are coming in and whatnot. And then this character name or this contestant name, Ape, you know, proper, you know, you're a bad name. Like, you know, I'm pretty sure it means, you know, I should be grateful. You know what I'm saying? Strong name. And I'm like, okay, you know, Naja in the building. You know, tell me why the dude comes in and, you know, he's like, hey guys, my name's Opie. And, you know, honestly thought it was a joke. You know, I started giggling and, you know, laughing. And even though that's not, you know, appropriate, I start giggling. And, you know, I'm just like, Opie, like, are we serious right now? Like, you have a proper, you know, Opeyemi, that's your name. And it's like, I couldn't even sit around and watch no more. I took the remote from my sister and canceled the Peacock membership and just went to my room. So I just wanted to ask you, like, why do Nigerians, you know, feel the need to gentrify and like colonize their name just to fit in, you know, on reality TV or whatever it may be?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not even on. This is happening a lot in the diaspora. Chukwudi will go to Starbucks and, like we discussed on a previous episode, and all of a sudden his name is Chuck Woody, first name Chuck, last name Woody. I mean, it's just reprehensible, disgusting behavior. I mean, Opeyemi, he needs to go take an ancestral trip, back to his motherland. And when he goes, he would be very, very lucky if his mother didn't just grab his ear, twist it 360 degrees, and flog him, give him a beating of a lifetime. So, I mean, that's the first step he needs to take. But it's definitely just disrespectful to your ancestors. And the only benefit of the doubt I can give him is, maybe, he wants the other contestants in the villa to, shout his name without asking him, if he fought lions back in his village. But other than that, just disgusting behavior.
Yeah, terrible behavior.
Yeah.
You know, he probably thinks, oh, you know, OP sounds European and exotic.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, the whole time it just sounds like a slur.
OP.
Like OP.
Excuse
like,
me?
Sound like a 5-year-old that
Yeah.
just, you know, did it on
OP.
himself. OP, like come on, bro. Like Opeyemi, like that's your name. So
Yeah.
definitely disgusted me that day for sure.
For sure. You need to have some more respect for yourself first and foremost.
Yeah, hope he's seeing this.
Yeah, for sure. Last week I was reading a book. It was a history book. And I came across the Berlin Conference of 1884, I believe. And there was like a visual, 13 men standing, a poster, like a board with just a map of Africa. And, I just started thinking about, what those men ate that day. I know it wasn't jollof rice. So I started thinking, if European colonizers tasted proper jollof rice at the Berlin Conference, or just proper jollof rice in general before, drawing the borderlines, do you think they would have drawn the borderlines any differently?
Definitely. I feel like, back then you're getting fed, what did they eat back then? Like custard and beans on toast. I feel like, them not having a real meal is, why the borderlines look like the way they look today. You know what I mean? I feel like the second, their mouth touches that food, you know what I'm saying? They have to sit down and really be like, wow, okay, like, we really just had some real food right now. So, yeah, the project gets delayed for a little bit, but, when they get back to work, the real work starts. You know what I'm saying? The lines they draw out start to make a lot more sense. And I feel like, life will look a lot different today if they really had a real meal.
Personally, I think that if I was a European colonizer and I tasted proper jollof rice, I would have probably canceled the whole project, I'd have just started asking myself, what else is here on this continent? I probably would have just tossed the whole project, to be honest.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like, yeah, like I said, when your diet is custard and beans and all that crap, you don't really know. I don't know how to say this. The real knowledge doesn't, transpire through your mind. You know what I mean? So I feel like, when you don't have that proper food and you have such a big task in front of you, it's not going to work out.
Yeah, that's really powerful. The way you broke that down is powerful. That's true. That's definitely a good angle to look at it from,
Yeah, definitely. So I remember, like, I was in high school some years ago, and I was talking to the one girl named Ada.
I remember, bro.
Yeah,
this is good ant lore, bro.
Yeah, junior year or whatever. So, I ain't gonna lie, we were having like a rough stretch of days and whatnot leading up to Valentine's Day. She's mad at me for no reason. So I'm like, how can I make it up to her? Like, how could I really, get on her good side again? And, I'm thinking about this all while I'm at this African wedding. And, they're playing this one song, Adobe. Everyone knows that song. And, Corday Bellows' verse comes up. And like I said, the girl's name's Ada. So when his verse came up, it's like a light bulb, sparked in my mind. Because, Corday Bello in the song, he's like, Ada, Ada, Ada. You know what I'm saying? And then I was like, wow, this is perfect. I'm going to write this as a poem for her.
Yeah.
And give it to her tomorrow on Valentine's Day. So, I go home and I start cooking. I write the whole verse on this, nice little note card with some chocolate. And then, next day I give it to her. And then, she reads it and then she crumbles it and then she throws it in my face and she's like, you must think I was born yesterday. And then she walks off. And then that's the last time we ever spoke. So I just wanted to ask you, like, is, apologizing to your significant other or like someone you're talking to, like, is that emotional treason?
Yeah, definitely. Nothing short of emotional treason. I was even disappointed in her that she only threw the paper back at you. She should have just slapped you right there, just beat you right there. Honestly, what you did is just reprehensible. I mean, do you know the way you dancing? What is that gonna fix? I mean, you just wasted her time. And let's really think about it, bro. You literally wrote the lyrics of a song that, generator powered radios are playing in Lagos. She knew every lyric. Next thing you know, she knows that if she accepted the apology, the next time she was mad at you, you would just write, on that God you win, on that God you, like you're a useless man, bro. That's all I have to say. But we've already talked about this a million times over. But you know why you're still asking foolish questions?
Yeah, just wanted to see your real input on this. Obviously we have talked, you were there like in the cafeteria when
Yeah.
it happened. So definitely that was when I was in high school. I'm a new born again person. So, I definitely never try something like that again.
Mhm.
Maybe probably use a different artist next time. But
Who would you have used?
good question. Probably like Rimmer or something. I
Emma?
don't know.
Nah.
Maybe Automotive Black.
Yeah. Now we're talking.
Yeah.
I remember when I was like 13, I got an academic probation. This was like quarantine time. Everybody's online. I was just being lazy. And my parents got an email. I was obviously we're home, so my dad came home and he's just in the living room. I go to greet him. I said, "Good evening, sir. Good evening, dad." He says, "Good evening." And then I went back to my room. A couple minutes later, I hear Andrew, and then I had to go downstairs and pretty much explain myself. And prior to that, I'd been practicing in the mirror. What I'm gonna say, how I'm gonna cover up, because I knew I needed to cover up. So I practiced a cover up for about 15 minutes to an hour, and in the mirror, I even looked up some psychology tricks. Liars, their eye wanders. So I made sure to practice, active eye contact in the mirror. I go downstairs, I give the whole cover up story, and my dad, he's just looking at me alongside my mom. And right before I was able to finish what I was the story, he says, "That's not what happened." And he even adds details that I forgot. The story that I gave myself. I was starting to believe. He gave me details that I hadn't even known. So my question to you is: at what point in human evolution did an African parent attain the skill to know a lie before it comes out of your mouth?
It's a great question. I feel like, you definitely overthought a lot of things that day. And, honestly, you underthought a lot of things that day. African parents, they were once 13. You know what I'm saying? They've been in your shoes. You know what I'm saying? They've been in that situation where the headmaster sent some mail back home and, that said that, oh, yeah, your kid, he failed this class. They've been in the same situation as you. So I feel like, they've had time to process and, learn the ins and outs of lying. You know what I mean? I feel like, your mom, she's probably had countless moments where she had to lie to Auntie, Florence and tell her, oh yeah, Auntie Florence, I enjoyed this moi moi and jollof. Whole time she threw it away first bite. You know what I'm saying? They really mastered the art of lying. So, the fact that you thought you could get away with it, is definitely concerning. I feel like, you can't really treat an African mom like, she's some type of square, or an African dad like they're some type of square.
Yeah.
They know what they're doing.
Yeah, I was very foolish that day. To be honest, I should have realized that I was talking to a former Hall of Famer before I even attempted such foolishness. So definitely, I mean, that was years ago, but definitely looking back at it, I can just laugh at myself now. It was very foolish.
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, your parents' jerseys are in the rafters of lying. So definitely, didn't know who you were playing with that day. So like a couple of weeks ago, my mom, she was like, "Can you go run me some errands at Southwest Market?" So I was like, "Okay, mom, I got you." So I head over to Southwest, and one of the items on the list was 4 loaves of Agege bread. So I'm like, okay. So I go, and there's a huge line, and I'm like, "What's this line for?" And then the lady next to me, she was like, "It's for the bread." So I'm like, "Okay, I'll wait in this line or whatever." Bro, a couple minutes go by, and you would have thought like, somebody dropped a huge sugar cookie next to a pile of ants, because the way those people rushed that bread, it was insane. Like, I'm talking people trampling each other, people fighting, throwing hands, all this stuff over some bread. I'm low-key appalled. I'm like distraught. And, it was like the last batch they were cooking that day. So I was low-key frustrated because it's like, dang, I came all the way here. Y'all don't even have none left. Like this dude, this uncle was yelling, grabbing the bread. And I'm like, bro, relax. You're making noise. And he was like, I'm making noise. And, he just started doing a bunch of nonsense. So I don't know. I just decided to just go home. So my question to you is like, why do African people treat fresh agege bread like it's, some type of cure to cancer or something?
That's just a disgusting, inappropriate question that you just asked me. You should know that already that Agege bread has, a lot of emotional and financial healing, properties. And when that steam leaves the bag of the bread, then the healing properties they leave as well. So that's just a disgusting question. And nobody wants to have the leftover Agege bread, the cold Agege bread from yesterday that was baked yesterday. That you have to have a hammer and a chisel to open it. The healing properties have already left, as I said. So yeah, I mean, you did you bring some bread home? Were you able to bring some?
Yeah, I was able to bring like half a loaf because
Okay.
they were all fighting and stuff. But honestly, I would rather bring half a loaf of fresh agege bread than the cold, agege bread or the wheat agege bread even. So I was like, you know what, I'll probably just spin back to my mom, and she completely understood. She's been in those situations of war, so she's more experienced than I am. So
Yeah, but at the same time, she asked for four. You brought half of a loaf. I mean, let's really think about it. If you didn't, if you don't have four loaves that are burning through the plastic grocery bag, on the way home, then I don't think you're an Odogu because it's war, like you said. So you're supposed to be fighting against other people and come out on top as an Odogu. So I think that just revoked your Odogu status. I mean, at least you didn't come home with nothing, but I still think that was just reprehensible that you only came up with a half a loaf.
yeah, I mean, it was definitely my first war, so you know that never happened again, never took place. Now
Mm,
I know what to do. When the fresh agege bread comes out. So
yeah. Mhm. Recently, the power in my apartment went out, and I remember the exact time. It was 2:47. I remember because I was on Facetime with my homeboy, and the power cut out. And from then, I just started reading books, reading Diary of a Wimpy Kid in the house. And by 9 p.m., I found myself eating dinner with my phone's torchlight. And then by 1 p.m., I mean by 1 a.m., I stepped outside, because I mean the whole day I wasn't able to do anything. And I see my neighbor. He walks out of his apartment door, and he says he looks out, to the night sky, and he says NEPA. It was like it was really cinematic. And you know, after that, I just started thinking of Nigeria and NEPA, and I started thinking of what NEPA would be, how it would be if NEPA owned, a bigger infrastructure. So my question to you is, if NEPA, you know, was in charge of powering the sun, how many hours of darkness would the Earth average a day?
great question. I feel like honestly, um, even assuming that we would average any light period, because this is NEPA we're dealing with, it's kind of crazy. I'm not gonna lie. Like we gotta be, very like we gotta think deep. Like this is NEPA we're talking about. So, but to be honest, I'm gonna be generous and I'm gonna say about 14 hours of light, but 10 hours of maintenance. And it's gonna be inconsistent every single day. There's not gonna be a set time. So, you could be in, the middle of an interview, the light could go off. You
Hmm.
know what I'm saying? You could be asleep, but the light's gonna be, the sun's gonna be up. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like if NEPA's in control of our sunlight, it's just gonna be straight up inconsistency,
Hmm.
you know, all the way through.
Yeah,
So that's how I see it.
yeah. Like imagine like walking out to take a morning walk, the sun's shining, you're in a jolly mood, and the light goes out. No warning, no nothing, no apology after. You have to go back home. I think life would be so much more sad, if NEPA was in charge of the sun. I'm glad NEPA is not in charge of the sun.
Yeah, I'm definitely glad too. Like it would just be nothing but doom and sadness each and every day.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Jesus.
Yeah, amen. I remember like a couple years ago, like 2 years ago,
Mm,
it was like prom season or whatever.
yep.
And I'm getting ready, I'm getting fly, ready to, just go into the limo with my friends and head over there.
Mm,
So, I got my Dior Sauvage on, I got my, EOS lotion on, I got my, cocoa butter, oil, whatever you want to call it on.
mm,
I smell good, I'm ready to go. Next thing you know, like I go in for one more spray of the Dior Sauvage. And I'm not gonna lie, this time it smelled like a little fishy. And it kind of caught me off guard. So I sprayed again, same smell. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. So the smell, I let the smell fade away. And then next thing you know, a stronger smell comes by, and I'm like, I immediately know, okay, this is fish stew. My mom is cooking downstairs. So, and the second I smelled that, I was like, yeah, it's over with. I'm cooked. So I just wanted to ask you, like, why do African moms love waiting to the exact moment you're about to leave to cook the most aggressive smelling stew or food in the world?
Hmm. Yeah, this answers my question finally after 2 years. I was wondering why the limousine was smelling like stuck fish. But anyways, I digress. Yeah, I think your cologne is just a disrespect to her culinary abilities, and in a way, she's just protecting her baby. Like cooking that before you go out to prom. She's just protecting you from strange women of the night. So it's definitely just it's just some mom tendencies. I don't think it's anything past that. But furthermore, I think that the stew it has more silage and projection than any cologne ever could. So maybe that's why the limousine and the whole prom building was smelling of stockfish and aggressive stew. By the time she leaves, like by the time you leave, you're not just a teenager going to prom. You're pretty much a caterer for a buffet. So that's how I see it.
Yeah, I think it's some type of like spiritual Bluetooth that connects. Like when the second you put your shoes on, that's when they decide, you know what, let me close all the windows in the house. Let me really let this smell like connect to every, thing and object in this house. So definitely think that's what it is.
Yeah, the spiritual Bluetooth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So when you slip on your shoe, that's when she closed all the doors.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay, and windows. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
For my cousin's graduation party, I noticed something fishy was happening at the pepper soup pot. The auntie serving, one person would take a step to the pot. The auntie's ladder would go deep, fishing and searching for different goods. Another person would step up, and they would just get what's at the top of the pot. The ladder wouldn't even go deep; it would just pick up what's at the top of the pot. And it got me thinking, if two of the most powerful Nigerians were at the same party, what would happen? So my question to you is, if Dangote and Wizkid were both at the same Nigerian party and they got a pepper soup from the auntie, who is the auntie giving more meat, and who has the meat with the more complicated bone situation? Like who has to eat around the bone to get the meat? Dangote or Wizkid?
Deep question for sure. I feel like, with African aunties that serve at parties, all, the food serving size is based off of, hierarchy and, how much they know you and respect you. An African auntie knows exactly who Dangote is. You know what I'm saying? No question. But she needs her, her younger daughter to tell her who Wizkid is. You know what I mean? So Wizkid would still get, I feel like Dangote, no question, would get the bigger, portion of meat. Wizkid would, get some meat too, but it's based off vibes, not because of his net worth or anything. You know what I'm saying? That the African auntie probably doesn't even really know him.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. So you think Wizkid is getting the meat that's just like 95% bone and just like 5% meat, like the outer covering is meat, but it's just a trap.
Yeah, like I like to call it the catfish meat because you bite it thinking, okay, this is pretty good size, but the whole time you're just getting a mouthful of bone. So I feel like he definitely get that if Dangote was in the same vicinity as him.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's a very deep answer.
Yeah.
And I think that'll wrap up our episode for today. We did cover some very important topics.
Yep. Make sure y'all tap in with the Instagram. Really all platforms, right? Yeah.
Tap in with us. All right, y'all. Y'all stay blessed. Catch you on the next one.